The Waves of Tech is the down-to-earth tech podcast for you, your family, and your friends. We remove all the complicated, drawn-out explanations of technology and simply talk about how technology is influencing every element of our lives, from social media and the cloud to tweeting and mobile communication. We talk tech in a different way. So plug in your devices and listen as we get ready to ride the waves of tech.
On episode 424 of The Waves of Tech, Amazon begins selling Apple products, InSight lands on Mars, and Apple's day in court. The Waves of Tech is powered by modernlife.network, modern issues, modern discussions. Well, Steve, welcome in, man. How you doing today?
Well, I'm doing well. We just finished Thanksgiving here in the U.S., where you were up here on Friday. We had a really great time. And last night we couldn't record. We both had conflictions going on. But I just want to say I wish I owned Amazon right now because they have absolutely made a killing since Thanksgiving. It's just amazing the amount of money that's rolling through Amazon right now.
Absolutely. With all the Black Friday specials that they had with Cyber Monday that occurred. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're going to talk about Apple here in a second, too, and how it relates to what Amazon in the deal that they've struck, which just, of course, means a little bit more money in Amazon's pocket. But it's absolutely incredible to see where that, what started as an online bookstore, essentially, Steve, and has grown into this absolute mega giant with cloud computing, web services, and everything in between. Now owns grocery stores, owns a wide variety of companies and technologies that we have no idea that are going on behind the scenes. But yeah, did you get around to doing any Black Friday or Cyber Monday shopping?
Actually, I did. However, nothing that I was purchasing was, on sale, or it was just normal standard pricing. But I will tell you, over the past few days that I have ordered, that I'm not getting things with my normal 2-day shipping. It's taken 3 or 4, so there must be a backlog or something going on.
Yeah, no doubt, especially with what's going on with Amazon. And, it seems to be the place to go. So let's start there, Steve, in the Amazon court. Amazon recently struck a deal with Apple, finally, to sell new iPhones and iPads. And so the products will be sold directly from Apple and the Apple authorized retailers only. So anybody that's selling any sort of third-party Apple product is going to have to find a different way to sell their things or get approval from Amazon and Apple. So let's dive into this a little bit, Steve. As I mentioned, Amazon has made a deal. They're going to be including the sale of iPhones, iPads, Apple Watches directly on Amazon. Amazon, Steve, if you don't remember, and I had to kind of rack my brain and dig a little bit, they had sold Apple products before, but of course those had been through third-party sellers, which means that the prices are often variable. Some of the sourcing isn't quite as reputable. And so now with the official, quote-unquote, official Apple prices and products. So Apple's going to start rolling out Amazon sites starting this week in the US, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Japan, India, kind of all over the spectrum there. And the one thing that is not going to be on there is Apple's Echo competing HomePod, which will not be sold on Amazon. It's quite, we can understand the conflict there. One thing that will be sold is Apple's owned Beats brand. One thing that I did find that will be sold, Steve, is the Apple TV, which essentially is in competition with Amazon's, their Cast product that they have. And so with the exclusion of HomePod, but the addition of that streaming capability, I thought that was a little bit different. I don't really know why that determination was made. But Amazon is constantly working to enhance their customer experience, right? One way to do that is increasing their selection of products that they know their customers want. And that's exactly what Amazon wants to do. They're looking forward to expanding their assortment of Apple and the Beats products globally. As I mentioned, as part of the deal, only Apple and Apple authorized resellers will now be allowed to sell products through their site. Any company that is currently selling Apple products on Amazon will see their listings taken down starting as of January 4th. So they still got about 6 weeks or so. And they'll need to apply to Apple to become official resellers before they're allowed to sell them again on Amazon. Steve, what do you think about this? Apple has always been sort of a one-stop shop. You go to Apple, you go to their authorized dealers, their websites to get these authorized devices. And I think it seems about fitting in the right time. I know Amazon has a number of, the Kindle Fire, which does compete essentially with some of the tablets like the iPads, but I think it does provide Amazon customers with what they want. And that's a variety of options for their devices to be in home, and it gives people what they want, and a lot of people want Apple products. What do you think about this?
I'm actually not surprised, and I'm kind of surprised that it took this long. I think it's a win-win for both. I mean, certainly Amazon is the outlet to do this kind of thing. Apple has the product. Why not? Certainly I get why HomePod is not there, because a lot of Amazon's backbone is really now based on the Echo technologies. It's been integrated into not only their products, but third-party products. For example, I just found out that my thermostat in my home is now Alexa compatible, so I can talk to Alexa and change my temperature in my home, my TV, and some things like that. And we're seeing more and more of those integration factors. And as they continue to expand that line, I think that's an area that they are certainly going to protect from any other competition. With regards to the other products, I'm really surprised that the Apple TV and you could include the iPads, which can be competitors to a lot of the quote Fire products that Amazon had. Certainly their phone was a flop, so I don't see a problem with that, or watches. But when it comes to digital streaming products or productivity products based on a tablet format, I'm actually a little surprised. But here again, in the eyes of Amazon, people are either going to buy an Amazon product or not, right? They're going to have their mind made up if it's an Apple or if it's an Amazon product. So if they already have that decision in their head, why not offer them the opportunity? Otherwise, they're going to buy somewhere else that one-off product, and you're out whatever the differential is there. So not really surprising. The one thing about Apple products, and it's very, very hard to find, quote, sales or lower pricing. The price are pretty much controlled across the board. So it's not like you're going to perhaps save a lot of money. But if you are a Prime guy or gal and are in the Amazon family, then yeah, it could be the right avenue for you.
Yeah, it's interesting how sort of the partnership with Amazon and Apple came to be. We know that Amazon, earlier, I think last year, inked a very similar partnership with Nike, that allowed both companies to reduce sort of the counterfeits on Amazon and also gain a stronger control over some of the unauthorized third-party sales that are going on with Nike products. And you can see that following forward with the likes of Apple and Amazon. And you're right, Steve, I think I misspoke. I think I said Cast instead of Fire TV, so thank you for correcting me on that. And It'll be interesting because, like you said, there's going to be a limited selection of Apple products on Amazon, but essentially the sellers and customers are going to be getting what they want. And I think this is a really good pull for Amazon just to get some interested parties over onto the site more frequently. He said they're going to buy a Kindle, they're going to buy a Fire TV, if they're going to buy an Echo, they're going to do that no matter what. I don't really feel like the Kindle is comparable to the iPad and vice versa, right? You kind of know what you're going to go and get, first and foremost. I don't know if there's going to be that much of a battle. I think really the winner here is Apple, to be honest with you, being able to compete in that marketplace, to have their products front and center, where they can have a dedicated page, people know to go there exactly, and Amazon customers can incorporate the purchase of Apple products within one marketplace instead of going to multiple. I think that bodes well for Apple. So yeah, I definitely echo you with the Echo devices, where they don't want to compete. The future of Amazon is working with the Echo devices and Alexa, and working with that artificial intelligence to build around everything that Amazon wants to do. And so it makes a lot of sense to keep Siri and HomePod out of that competitive space. And, these caveats, Apple completely understands them. Amazon's going to put their foot down. It doesn't, to me, really seem like that is the most rival product out there between the HomePod and Echoes. So everything else is kind of fair play. I totally get where that line in the sand was made.
Typically the big boys play together or they fight each other. Amazon and Apple, I think it's been an interesting partnership at sometimes, and sometimes it's been a war when it comes to what's going to be sold and not. But, I think everybody agrees is the more outlets you have for your product, then the better off you are to be. So I'm sure there's some under-the-table handshakes there too, Dave, about perhaps some profit margin differentials as compared to maybe what contractually is with Best Buy and some of the others.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because Best Buy has to actually have them in brick and mortar for display and for sale, as we're Amazon. They just need the outlet. They just need to be able to get to it. And so I think there's a different transactional component there.
Well, let's jump a little bit higher, Steve, in the technology space and head out to Mars. I know that's quite a jump, but I think we can all make it. The InSight spacecraft, part of the NASA JPL partnership, has landed, and it landed yesterday, Monday afternoon, to a great roar from Command Center. If you guys get a chance, head over to @NASAJPL on Twitter. They a really cool, I think it was about a 1.5 2 minute breakdown or live stream, of what happened during the landing. Really cool visuals, seen in Command Central and seeing everybody's celebration, some cool little handshakes and a lot of hugs around. So, Steve, Mars, landing of the InSight spacecraft, so much to talk about this. What do you want to add here?
Yeah, I don't even have a link for this, Dave, because I'm just going to kind of go off the cuff with this because there's a lot of interesting components with this. In actuality, for the U.S., this is the 8th time that we have sent probes to Mars, and they've all been successful except for one in history. Many other countries have attempted and have never achieved the feat, and I'm not saying that to boast America. I'm saying that it's a very incredibly difficult task. And it's been stated that it's like being in Los Angeles and heaving a basketball and making it into the hoop in New York. It takes that kind of accuracy and skill and planning to be able to do something like this. So the spacecraft actually left here in May, heading towards Mars. So it was about a 6-month journey. So let me think here. I think Mars is about 40 million miles away or something like that. Mars is actually the 4th rock from the sun. I think you've all heard of 3rd rock from the sun, which is Earth. So it is the 4th planet out from the sun. What this apparatus, this mission, this vehicle is to do is to really study the interior of Mars. And probes will be going down where they're checking, temperatures. And they're really trying to find out what the core is, what kind of wobble rate that the planet has, and various things like that. But this stuff always excites me. At least a couple times a week, I'm outside somewhere with my telescope checking things out. And this summer, the red planet was very noticeable even to the naked eye. We have a fatuation around the world with planet Mars. And that's probably because of old movies and things about Martians and that kind of things, which I think it's pretty cool. But what I did is I had to go somewhere yesterday during the time frame that the landing was to happen. So I was what I did is I took my iPad and I streamed it in my car. The entire drive that I had to make from start to finish was about an hour long. And it was very interesting to listen to the components of how this craft was going to land. And if one tiny little thing did not go right, it would have been a failed mission. One of the interesting things about this launch and this landing, Dave, is that prior to the entry of the atmosphere of Mars, there were 2 other suitcase-sized satellites deployed that followed the landing spaceship. And they were called Marco A and Marco B, and they provided relay transmissions of the signals and information because InSight itself is not a transmission vehicle. It's a research vehicle. And it's really interesting how it was able to do that. So if you go on the internet, you can actually see the sequences of what were to happen for this thing to land, where the Marcos get into position, and then the craft itself starts going into the Martian atmosphere. And we got to remember that the Martian atmosphere is thinner, and also the gravity is less. And those are all very interesting components about landing. Certainly, it had a heat shield, and it was being slowed down. During the entire duration, it had to go through from 13,000 miles per hour down to 5.5 miles per hour. So as it came through at Mach 1.7 in speed, it deployed these supersonic chutes, which then, lowered it in terms of speed, and then that was jettisoned. And then I think it has 12 or 17 tiny little rockets that go into a pulse mode to finally take it down to the dirt and land. And listening to it and listening to the relays of the validation and verification of the data that each of those components happen was exciting to hear. It was really an uptake. The reason we even talk about this, Dave, is I think a lot of times we get get consumed with just, I'm going to say, quote, everyday tech. It's our personal tech, perhaps with business and things like that. But there are other components out there, other industries where the tech is, I think, at a much higher degree, a much precise degree than we typically talk about or understand. And for NASA and the other agencies across the world that pull things off like this, and now we can start beginning studying of some of the internal ways that Mars lives, I think is just phenomenal. And when you really think about it, how do you get something out there on a planet? It just blows me away. So the entire thing I thought was interesting. I really recommend everybody go and look at some of the videos that they have done and how the sequencing works. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, Steve, it is fascinating. That's the best word to capture all this. And, the incredible part is, as you said, this thing has taken, I just looked up, a journey of 483 million kilometers to get to Mars. I know that's not quite the distance to Mars. It's a lot shorter than that, but as part of its journey, it had to take that much. And minutes after touching down on Mars, the InSight spacecraft had already sent back a, quote, nice and dirty snapshot of its new digs. You could see the smooth terrain, the sandy terrain. You can also see one sizable rock that was visible. Another photo taken by its robotic arm-mounted camera after it landed on the planet showed a close-up of the spacecraft itself. So people are calling that, it took a selfie out in Mars, which I think is pretty cool. But everybody there, project managers to scientists to support staff, they're incredibly happy and incredibly, pleased with the safe and the exact boring landing location that they're in. And you're right, Steve, they're going to be taking, it's not a surface or an elemental research project. It's about learning what's on the inside of Mars, and I think that's really great that we're actually, this is the next frontier of science discovery and science exploration. I know a lot of us were disappointed and saddened by the losing of the space shuttle program, but at the same time, we are pushing the boundaries of what we can do as a society, what we're being able to do technologically and also engineering-wise. And Steve, when I heard the touchdown confirmed, words, I was just completely stoked, and it just set off jubilation, as I mentioned, in the Jet Propulsion Lab down here, just south of us in Pasadena, California. But also, I know it set off jubilation and online and with all the space enthusiasts that are out there, and including you who are live streaming it, going to a customer's site. And the InSight, just to give a little perspective here, the protective heat shield that was built and constructed for InSight endured temperatures up to 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, and the vehicle felt an atmospheric braking force of about 7.5 times the force of gravity that we actually feel here on Earth. And it still had a 39-foot wide supersonic parachute that inflated, that had a force of nearly 13,000 pounds per square foot. And you can see how robust and how well constructed this thing is, right? To understand the 482 million kilometer, that's about 300 million miles, that journey, how to withstand that, it's quite impressive. And Steve, I do want to encourage everybody to go to mars.nasa.gov/insight. You can check out the mission, you can check out the timeline, get the nuances and the videos that are associated with the spacecraft. You can look at a lot of the multimedia content. And I did want to share this, Steve, because I did not know this was going on. NASA has an 8-part podcast series called On a Mission that actually follows the InSight spacecraft on its journey, and it details the extraordinary challenges of landing on the red planet. So if you want to get out there and listen to a podcast specifically about InSight and what NASA's process of getting the mission, this amazing machine up there, you can check that out. It's called On a Mission. But Steve, you're right. It's amazing. It's the next frontier. We don't know what we're going to learn. We're not even sure how this is going to impact science in the future or even the educational space. But it's just absolutely amazing that you can shoot something for 300 million miles away from Earth, and it goes back and it lands completely unscathed and completely safe, and instead sending back selfies. It completely blows my mind, but at the same time, with the brilliance that we have in NASA and science and technology, I shouldn't be at least surprised at all.
I guess I'm kind of bumbling now because I'm just at awe at what we can do now today because of technology.
Yeah, I'm with you, Steve. It's hard to really wrap around, sort of the context of what's going on here, but, just understanding the implications and the impacts and the consequences of what they're doing up here, where as you mentioned at this top, what are we studying with Mars? And Mars has been an interest for a lot of scientists and government agencies and technologists and engineers for a long time. And I think this puts another lander on the surface of Mars that's going to give us a lot more information about the atmosphere, about the geologic makeup of the fourth planet, and there's a lot of fascination for it. So I think NASA is really sort of tickling our interest here and just giving us more and more week by week. And make sure you guys, whatever social media account you're on, you need to start following, the NASA's and the JPLs and the InSights. I follow Mars Rover on Twitter, and they do some amazing things. There's a couple of their spacecraft and, other, aeronautics and space travel accounts that I follow. Just find them. You keep in touch, man. It is so fun to get out there and sort of see, kind of the Wild West of space exploration right now. And I don't know about you, Steve, but it seems like both of us are on board, really excited. Kind of like you, I kind of mumble on a little bit because I don't want the story to end, but at the same time, I guess we have to. But yeah, it's definitely a great time in space travel and for NASA here, and also for the domestic United States and what that may mean internationally for travel in the future and in space exploration. Well, Steve, let's head on down the podcast road here and talk about Apple. And they're finding themselves in the United States Supreme Court right now, making arguments against their App Store being a monopoly. And first, I want to say, of course, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert in how the Supreme Court works. I'm not an expert in antitrust or monopoly. But Steve, I wanted to throw this out here because it had me scratching my head when I read it. So I just want to go through some details here, and then I just want to kind of bounce some ideas off you. The U.S. Supreme Court appeared skeptical on Monday when they went to court during oral arguments in a case that would actually permit, and this is the weird part, iPhone owners to move forward with an antitrust suit against Apple for allegedly inflating the prices in its App Store. And the reason, Steve, this is so vital and this decision could have ripple effects is that the lawsuit could actually disrupt not only Apple's mobile software sales company, but also potentially hit the company with hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties, and also potentially hit a number of other mobile software sales ecosystems with the likes of Facebook, Google, Amazon, and also could face hundreds of millions of dollars of penalties for those companies. And so, real briefly, I wanted to really mention that it's not the app developers that are bringing this, and I'll make clear here in a second, is that actual iPhone users alleged in court on Monday that the 30% commission Apple takes on app sales is leading app developers to increase their prices, hence passing on that burden to consumers. Of course, we know Apple blocks iPhone users from purchasing software from third-party marketplaces. We've known that for a number of years. And they're arguing that Apple is able to charge its commission because of its monopoly-based sort of antitrust power. Now, that was the argument. The Supreme Court is saying they will not settle the underlying antitrust issue. Rather, they're simply just reviewing iPhone owners, whether they're entitled to bring a case at all to Apple and to the courts. And Steve, I find this really interesting because in conversation in the court system, one of the justices said, how many app developers have actually brought suit against you being Apple? And we know that there's tens of thousands of app developers, right? From the beginning of having the Apple Store in the marketplace available to now, there have been hundreds of thousands. And the attorney for Apple came out and said, not one app developer has ever sued us over a 30% commission. And that is an ongoing rate that has been there for a while, right? And that's the way Apple's making their money. And so I thought the contrast, Steve, of the Apple iPhone users and owners bringing suits claiming that the 30% commission is, essentially harming their ability to purchase or invest in other applications, but no app developers have yet come to bring lawsuit against Apple. I thought that was a caveat we needed to make here. But what do you think about this, Steve? It's interesting. They're coming saying that this 30% commission that Apple is actually harming customers, in addition to the app makers. And there's a lot of ambiguity here. There's a couple rules and sort of, precedent law cases that I don't know enough about and which I'm not going to get into, but this could have a really drastic effect and really could have an adverse ruling with a broad impact on other tech giants, as I mentioned at the top of this segment, with electronic marketplaces. Where do you stand on this?
A couple things here. I think that part of this is a mistake in terms of a suit. The reason I say that, and it's from a customer perspective, app developer perspective, and Apple's perspective, is Apple built this ecosystem that all of us can partake in, that they need to monetize on to keep it going. It allows app developers to develop and have an income, and it allows people like us to buy apps and enjoy their functionality. What's the problem? Okay, a 30% take. All right, so there's commonalities with that in other industries when it comes to the marketing and sale of product. A 99-cent app, okay, that's 3 cents to Apple. Exponentially, you could do the math, but that's kind of the delta there, right? When I go to the App Store and I'm looking at something, if it's something that I'm interested in or have utility, I don't think about, wow, Apple's getting 30 cents, so this developer increased his by 30 cents, so it should only be this amount. If I am okay with that amount that is being requested for that app, that's my choice, that's my decision. I click, let me have it, and I go forward. I guess I really don't understand the beef, Dave, on this lawsuit, especially when it's coming from the utility end or the user end aspect of this whole situation.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's, I can understand that there has probably been a number of customers, i.e. iPhone owners and users, that have looked at an app and said, I really want it, but I don't want to pay that steep price. And we have to understand that the steep price isn't directly because of that 30% commission that Apple makes. Let's remember that app developers, they set their own prices. They're ultimately the direct seller of that product. Yes, that 30% commission is incorporated. It's built into that cost. But if the app developer could sell it for a cheaper amount, they would. And I'm not discrediting that 30% commission, that markup, because that is substantial. They are taking 30% of every dollar essentially that's sold there. But I don't know if I, as an end user, have ever not bought an app because I thought the app developer was being, sort of stiffed by Apple, and that they had increased their prices simply on that. To my knowledge, Steve, I've never heard an app developer that has complained about it. I'm sure there's grumbles because that is a large amount, but you see that in the Google store, right? The marketplace. You're going to see that on Amazon and eBay. You're going to see it in Facebook as well. There's that cost of doing business, and whether or not that's a monopoly issue or that's an antitrust, again, I can't speak to that because I'm just not aware enough. But there's been some justices that said, essentially, I've engaged in a one-step transaction with Apple, and sometimes if Apple's the only place to get it, maybe there's a monopoly, maybe there's an antitrust. But again, that may not be Apple's fault. That may be Google perhaps doesn't have the infrastructure that Apple does to allow app developing. And if Apple's the place where you need to get it, that's the place you need to get it, right? And it's a weird situation, Steve. And that's why I want to bring it up, just for ourselves, for our listeners, and our base out there, and other tech enthusiasts, to kind of think about what this may have implication-wise if the court allows them to move forward with filing suit for Apple. And historically, we know that most companies, when it comes to an antitrust or monopoly case, they typically win out. They usually prevail in sort of the business-friendly environment. We've talked with the FCC where they're leaning heavily towards the mobile markets, and maybe this is just something that will go through the courts and Apple will eventually win after spending money for their attorneys. But I've never felt that Apple is charging that commission, which is leading app developers to increase their prices, which is putting an unfair burden on me as a consumer. I've never felt that. Maybe for some of the larger corporations or some of these other iPhone owners that are trying to do startups and trying to work from home that are cash strapped, perhaps I can see the case, but I don't think there's an unfair competitive advantage that's going on right now in any of the marketplaces, to be honest.
These kind of things just give me a headache, to be honest with you. And I feel that, personally, that I don't believe anybody is, quote, getting screwed. I really don't. To go to the highest court in the land over something like this, I'm not going to say it's petty, but I don't see the validity behind costing versus, what is right in the consumer world. every choice we make in a purchase decision is ours to make. If we are unsatisfied with that or disgruntled about it, I'm sure there are procedures and processes to maybe obtain a rectification of that. But to have a case at the Supreme Court that perhaps a misidentified, misunderstood, or assumptions made on the strip out of what another party is charging. I could tell you about tickets I have purchased for events of lately, and the amount of fees and crap that were tacked on, which half of them I don't even know what they're for, was more than the tickets for the event themselves.
Absolutely.
In light, I mean, I don't know the entire depth of this, Dave, but I find situations like I just explained more infuriating than something like this where I have a choice. Well, I do with tickets, but I don't think that the impact of cost is as great as with the situation I mentioned.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know those convenient fees, the online processing fees, that at least I know when I am doing an app store purchase in any marketplace, electronic marketplace out there, that I know that the money is going to the app developer to improve their product, to improve their customer service, to reinvest into their product in their next version of their application, is funding that business and that model to make it happen. With the ticket sales, that's just straight profit for them. It's automized. There's nothing that any person on the back end is doing. Essentially, we're being charged an extra 50% sometimes, Steve, as you've experienced, and me around 30 to 35% just to hit buy and to print out our own tickets and to have the apps on our phone. Those companies are clearly making hand over fist more money. And so at least I'm comfortable paying a little bit more for a company that I know is reinvesting in itself, that's creating a product that is going to be usable, that's going to be loved and admired by so many people, and it's going to a better cause, And for that, I'm not necessarily opposed. But we'll have to keep up on this, Steve. We'll have to hear what the Supreme Court here in the United States comes up with and what that potential may be. So, Steve, tell me about Sirius XM, and then you have a Google Maps story you want to share with us as well.
Yeah, sometimes I'd like to close with real things that have happened within our lives that involve some kind of technology or technology company or service or something like that. And sometimes I really pick hard at certain companies, and sometimes I kind of pick but don't share their name. With this one, it's about Sirius XM. I'm going to use this as an example because many and numerous, if not most, companies work based on this principle. And I had some dealings with them not too long ago. So here it goes. And it goes like this. And that is, I have two vehicles that have Sirius XM that I've had for a number of years. It's really come to be that we really don't use it in our vehicles, and we've had it for years. Typically, it's on one station, so why am I paying these monthly fees for listening to perhaps one station or nothing at all? Because I'm listening to podcasts. I'm not listening to Sirius XM. Not that I don't mind people making money, and it's certainly very important. I don't know the exact phraseology of this, Dave, but the monies that the artists make off the revenues off of them playing their music is going up another 2.3%, which I think raises it to like 21%. And I'm not saying that's excessive or anything, but when I started adding all these things up in my utility and the use I'm using it, I said, I'm just not interested anymore. As with many of these service sites, you can log into your account and you can do pretty much anything. You can change packages as long as you're going up. You can do many things that cost you more money. But if you want to degrade anything or cancel, you are not going to be able to do it online. And certainly that's by design. And I kind of knew this because I had a previous run-in with Sirius XM. It's not that I am afraid to call them or anything like that. What irritates me is that the only purpose of this is so that you have to go through various layers of retention people that attempt to keep you on their service. And when I sold my Harley Davidson that had Sirius XM, I called them and tried to cancel it. And it took me a half an hour because of the retention tactics that were taking place to include, you know what, sir, you could let somebody else use this. You could buy a device to put in your home, and on and on and on. I just wanted it canceled, right? So when you were over the Friday, I got the email response from SiriusXM about the ones in my vehicles because I wrote them partially as an experiment because I already knew that I was no longer wanting the service, and I see there are no options for me to cancel my subscription online. So please accept this message as authority and my permission to cancel. And I got an email back. We apologize for the inconvenience this may have caused you. Yeah, it is a big inconvenience, and you're taking that point lightly, number one. In response to your email, due to the limited rights as an email team, we do not have authorization to cancel any subscriptions. Please call listener care at, and here's the number, right? So let's think about this. You have email support, you have access to the entire back end of the infrastructure of SiriusXM because people write in with problems or whatever the case may be. You've got to satisfy them, billing, whatever the case. But due to limited rights as an email team, we cannot cancel subscriptions. I found that ludicrous and BS, to be honest with you. And that's how I responded, basically saying, oh, another reason why I need to cancel, because you're incompetent. I say this because it's frustrating that we are being forced to, whatever service that we're dealing with, in many cases, to have to go through headaches of trouble to try and get what we want based on what we've been paying. And certainly tomorrow, I'm going to call them and I'm going to get my cancellations, but we shouldn't have to do this. It should be fact and law that if you have an account manipulation online and are able to increase whatever you're doing in terms of a package or service online within your account, you should also have the ability to go the opposite way. And I'm really, really, really tired of all these companies having these special people that are to convince you that you are wrong. You don't know what you're doing. You don't understand. You need this product or your life's going to be miserable. I say bunk to that, Dave.
Yeah, the whole idea with the retention specialists, retention personnel, whatever you want to call them, is quite ludicrous because once a consumer has made up their mind that they're going to cancel a product, 99.9% of the time, and it's probably that 0.1% is why we have retention specialists that actually retain the use of that good or that service. And it's frustrating, Steve, because when you talk about email, what do companies do with email? They can answer all your questions. They can upgrade your account. You can schedule visits. You can, anything you want done via email, you can do. But when it comes to canceling, you can't. And when you even try and log into I don't have a really good number for this percentage, but I'd say probably over 50% of the times you have an account online, you can't even cancel it without calling. I get companies wanting to retain their customers, absolutely. But you have to remember, 2018, people are blow and go. They want to be able to cancel what they want to cancel on the fly. Oh, shoot, man, I forgot to cancel my Patreon, or I forgot to cancel my Netflix, or I forgot to cancel this and that. Boom. 5 seconds later, you can be done and finished. Steve, we know how long and how poor customer service over the phone has historically been, not only just with tech companies, but also home improvement stores, any sort of like medical care you're trying to get. Customer service over the phone has never really gotten any better. And that's why people hate calling to cancel services. In SiriusXM, they need to get on board with this because, Steve, all you wanted to do was a simple cancellation of account. Yes, you could have just called right off the bat and said cancel, but as you said, it's an experiment. It's about finding out the capabilities of these companies, and if they're unwilling to even cancel something over email, what else are they not willing to do as a customer? They'd rather put you through a 5-10 minute plus wait time, plus another 5-10 minutes asking and taking surveys and trying to figure out if you really want to cancel and saying, okay, well, if he had it on his Harley, maybe he has another bike. So I'll ask him, hey, do you want to transfer to a bike? Oh, maybe, he travels. Maybe he wants to keep an extra subscription in case he has more people come with him. That's not what you're looking for. You want a simple cancellation. And a lot of these companies just simply won't provide it. And they use excuses as like limited rights, and Steve, I'm with you, man. It's frustrating. It's ridiculous that in this day and age that they can't provide that service to you. And I know they want to get people on the phone. But I'm serious, Steve. You've been through the cancellation process and the retention process. It's not pleasant. It's anything but fun. And the more frustrated your customers get, the more likely they're not going to come back. Because, Steve, I know there's a chance if you would have got another vehicle or another bike, you could have gone through and said, you know what, I had a good experience with SiriusXM. I'm going to sign up and give them more money. Now, what are the chances of you actually doing that? Because the process is so, laborious, because it is so agitating, it actually prevents customers from coming back to you instead of keeping them in the first place. So I'm right there with you, Steve. Super frustrating. And I remember on Friday when you got that email, you kind of you got red in the face and you're like, all right, we're talking about this. And it's a frustrating part of technology right now.
Retention fail, that's what it is. So, and lastly, Dave, I just want to talk about this real quick because I don't know if this has ever happened to anybody else. And you know how crap always happens to me? My wife and I, a few weeks ago, were down at the NHRA finals. And the evening that we got there, we parked the RV and then we decided we were going to go to a certain place to have dinner. So we got in my truck, and my truck does not have GPS. So we both had our phones, and each one of us were using Google Maps. And we popped in the address, and we started to leave based on the driving instructions from Google Maps. And we got to the first signal, and my phone said go left, and my wife's phone said go right. I didn't quite understand that. I think part of the reason both of us had our phones on is because we were in an area that we certainly weren't familiar with and whatever. And certainly if you're driving, it's best to have a co-pilot that's doing the same thing. And we started going one direction, and it took us in the total opposite direction that we found that where this was. It took us the other side of the freeway and down these roads, and it wasn't even close. And so I kind of figured out where I was and which way we needed to go, and we started heading that way. And we got to an area where certainly we thought we were lost and didn't know where we were going. And once again, my phone was giving different directions than my wife's one. We're both on iOS devices. We're both on Google Maps. We're both on the same in the same vehicle. We were driving down the road, and my phone said it's so-and-so on the left-hand side in such and such amount of time. I drive by, and it never says you've reached your destination. And then I get farther down, and my wife's phone says you need to make a U-turn. So the bottom line is, I don't know how that happens, how it could even be possible, but you want to talk about a frustration. Now, somebody's going to ask, why didn't you go to Apple, use the Apple Maps on your iPhone and see if it was doing the same thing? Well, after a while, this became a competition and who was right, and to see if we could really find some boners with Google Maps. So it's one of those things that happens, I guess, but it just doesn't make sense that the same manufacturer of phone, the same app, getting different GPS directions that were totally in error.
Yeah, I've never heard about this, Steve. I've never been in a car where it said go left, go right, and took us in two opposite directions. That's pretty bizarre. And I'd love to hear if any of our listeners out there have done that. So, make sure you hit us up on Twitter at The Waves of Tech or on Facebook at Waves of Tech. And yeah, that's bizarre. I've never been in a position, like obviously different, like take this freeway or that freeway, but it's all essentially ending at the same location, but not completely opposing directions to one place and end up getting somewhere where you're not supposed to. That's pretty bizarre. But it did remind me, Steve, you remember back in the day when you actually had to do sort of that circle 8, around with your phone to recalibrate the GPS. Do you remember having to do that?
Yeah, I'm old enough.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it made me. I was like, okay, maybe you just got to recalibrate. You got to do like that infinity sign, I think of what it was, or figure 8. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
And maybe just do that a few times, But yeah, that's a really bizarre experience. And no, I haven't had that experience.
Yeah, it became a challenge after a while, and then later on it just became funny as we both laughed and didn't know where we were. We finally made it to our destination and had dinner, and luckily I just remembered how to get back and didn't have to use it, so it all worked out.
Yeah, I'm glad it worked out. Steve, just like this week, I know we started a little bit late this week. It's a day late, but you know what? Hey, I guess next week we're going to make up for it. We're going to be a day early because I'm going to be heading out of town for a week training session. So we're going to record a day early. But that's how podcasting works, right? We want to make sure we get content out there week after week. And this was a little bit longer episode, but I'm glad we got through it all, Steve, and I hope everybody enjoyed it.
It never fails. It always seems that the least amount of topics we have to talk about, the longer it goes.
Always, always. Well, everybody, we appreciate you tuning in. Episode 424. We will be back. Make sure you guys head over to YouTube. You will have a link in the show notes, but we have a YouTube page now, Waves of Tech. It has all of our podcasts on there as well. And also follow us on Twitter at The Waves of Tech. And of course, The Waves of Tech is powered by modernlife.network. Thanks for tuning in. And don't forget to keep on teching.